SingleDad let a stranger use his charger. He didn't know she was the CEO on the run. The clock above the espresso machine blinked 11:57 p.m. in faded green digits. Ben Carter wiped down the countertop with slow, practiced motions, the scent of coffee grounds and faint vanilla syrup still hanging in the quiet air. The caf had emptied an hour ago, save for one lonely college student asleep in the corner, with her face pressed to a book. Ben didn't have the heart to wake her, not yet. His fingers moved automatically to rinse the milk frother, toss the last stale croissants, lock the pastry case. It was a rhythm now, this closing ritual. Predictable, safe, something solid in a world that had turned fluid and uncertain after Emily died. He glanced at the small picture tucked beneath the till, his daughter Ivy smiling with 2 missing front teeth and a homemade paper crown on her head. He smiled back at her. She'd be asleep now, curled up in that ridiculous unicorn blanket, probably with all the lights still on. She always said she kept them on for the moon's sake, as if the moon would get lonely otherwise. Ben had long since stopped arguing logic with 6-year-old reasoning. He leaned back against the counter and sighed. His feet ached, his eyes burned, but his heart, it felt okay, maybe even a little full. Ivy had that effect, even on the hardest days. The bell above the door chimed suddenly sharp and unexpected, and Ben turned just in time to see the wind rush in, followed by a woman in a soaked trench coat, clutching her bag like it held something more than just belongings. She was breathless, her hair plastered to her cheeks, rain trailing down her sleeves. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes wide. "I know you're closing. I just need to charge my phone, please. Just for a minute." Ben blinked. She looked more lost than dangerous, exhausted, not threatening. Her voice was calm but strained, and her eyes sharp gray like a storm darted behind her as if afraid someone might follow. Ben exhaled slowly and nodded. "Charger's right there," he said, pointing to the wall near the window. "Help yourself. I'll pretend I'm still open." Relief washed across her face like sunlight cutting through fog. "Thank you," she whispered. She crossed the room quickly, plugged her phone in with shaking hands, and sank into the seat near the outlet. The light from her screen flickered on, casting a pale glow over her features. Elegant cheekbones, 2 clean nails, a coat that looked expensive despite being soaked. She didn't belong here. But then again, neither did he. Ben turned back to wiping counters, pretending not to watch her from the corner of his eye, but something about her felt off. Not wrong, just misplaced, like a puzzle piece in the wrong box. The woman curled tighter into herself, eyes fixed on her screen, and Ben decided not to ask any questions. Not yet. She didn't need interrogation, she needed a charger. And maybe a moment to breathe. He understood that feeling better than anyone. So he let the clock keep ticking, let the coffee linger in the air, and let the door stay unlocked just a little longer than usual. The charger cord made a soft click as she plugged it in. Her phone buzzed to life with a vibration that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet caf. Ben stole another glance. She hadn't ordered anything, hadn't removed her coat. Her eyes were still darting between the screen and the rain-smeared window, as if half expecting someone to appear through the storm and drag her out. But she hadn't run in screaming. She hadn't asked for help. Only one thing: "Can I borrow your phone charger?" Not coffee, not shelter, not "help me please." Just the bare minimum, a lifeline of percentage points glowing in digital green. Ben had been tired, ready to lock the door and go home. But that sentence, quietly delivered, trembling just beneath the surface, had landed on him like a stone in still water. Now she sat huddled by the window, with wet hair staring at her screen like it might decide her fate. "Do you want tea?" Ben finally asked, his voice soft. "Awesome." On the house, she looked up startled, as though she'd forgotten anyone else was there. Then a small, uncertain nod. "If it's not too much trouble." Ben moved without another word, grabbing the peppermint blend Ivy always said smelled like hugs. He filled a cup, slid it onto the table near her, and returned to wiping the counter. He didn't hover, he didn't pry, but he noticed she didn't touch the tea. She didn't sip, didn't warm her hands on the mug like people usually did. She just stared at it like she didn't know how to trust a simple kindness. He dried his hand slowly, wondering if he should say something more. Then she spoke. "Thank you." Her voice was quieter now, measured. She looked up and met his gaze, and in that split second, something flickered across her face. Recognition. No, something older, like grief buried under too many layers of polish. "I won't stay long," she added quickly. "Just until my phone has enough battery." "No rush," Ben replied. "Rain's not letting up anytime soon." She nodded again, but her fingers clutched the phone tighter. Ben turned and grabbed a clean towel from the rack. "Here," he said gently, setting it beside her. "You're drenched." The smallest smile ghosted across her lips. "Guess I wasn't very subtle." "Nope," he said, "but you're lucky I'm not a detective." She gave a short breath of laughter, the first real sound from her that didn't carry tension in its bones. For a few minutes, silence settled between them again, not awkward, just careful, like two people sharing space in a waiting room between lives. She wiped the rain from her face with a towel, then finally took a sip of the tea. Her shoulders relaxed only slightly, but it was enough. "You own this place?" she asked. Ben shook his head. "Just the closing guy. Mornings are busier. People come here for the oat milk and overpriced scones. And you?" "I come for the paycheck," he said with a smirk. "And the quiet, mostly." She nodded. "I get that." He leaned on the counter now, less guarded. "So you got caught in the storm." She hesitated, then nodded. Something like that. It wasn't a lie, not really, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Ben didn't push. He knew what it meant to have reasons you weren't ready to explain. The college student in the corner stirred awake, blinked at the time, and shuffled out with a wave and a thank you. The bell chimed behind her. Now it was just the two of them, alone in the soft hum of the cafe's fluorescent glow. Finally, her phone buzzed again, a message, or maybe a warning. She looked at it, eyes scanning quickly. Her breath caught. And in that single inhale, Ben saw something that didn't belong in a normal night. Fear. But she slipped the phone into her pocket, reached for the tea again, and smiled too quickly. "I should get going," she said. Ben didn't stop her. He just nodded. But he had a strange, quiet feeling in his chest. Like maybe the storm hadn't passed yet. And maybe, just maybe, it had followed her inside. Ben had seen a lot of faces come through the caf. Night workers, runaways, tired parents, students clinging to their deadlines like lifelines. He knew what exhaustion looked like, knew what fear looked like too. But this woman, this Rachel, if that was even her name, had eyes like something else entirely. Not just afraid, hunted. She barely touched her tea, and when she did, she held it like a prop, not a comfort. Her gaze darted often, not just to the windows, but to corners, door frames, reflective surfaces. Her phone never left her side. "Still raining," Ben said quietly, glancing outside at the shimmering sidewalk. "You can wait here as long as you need." She hesitated. Ben watched her eyes, storm gray rimmed with tired shadows. Something flickered in them. Not just exhaustion, not just weariness, gratitude. But it was buried deep, like a light kept on low behind too many closed doors. She offered a polite smile. "Thank you." "Really?" He waved it off. "It's just a charger and dry air." "Nothing heroic. You'd be surprised," she murmured. The rain hit harder now, rhythmic, steady. Ben moved to the windows and adjusted the blinds, halfway dimming the view from outside. No need to invite any more attention. "Bad night?" he asked gently. She looked down. "Just needed to disappear for a while." Ben nodded. He didn't push. He didn't need the full story. Not yet. Instead, he busied himself behind the counter, restacking cups that didn't need restacking. From the corner of his eye, he saw her finally sip the tea, just a little. She winced as it touched her lips, too hot maybe, or too unfamiliar. Still, she didn't put it down. There was something steadying about holding something warm. He knew that too. After a few minutes, her voice returned, softer. Do you always keep the place open this late? Officially, no, Ben said, leaning on the counter now. But I don't mind lingering. Gives me time to think. Think about what? He shrugged. What to pack for my daughter's school lunch tomorrow. Whether I remember to pay the light bill. Whether she needs new shoes. She smiled faintly. How old is she? 6, going on 16. She chuckled. It was small but real. That sounds exhausting. It is, he said, smiling. But she's worth it, always. A pause stretched between them, long but not uncomfortable. She looked down again, her fingers curling tighter around the mug. Sounds like she's lucky, she said. Ben didn't say anything, just watched her as she stared out the window, rain streaking down the glass like tears that refused to fall. Eventually her phone buzzed again. She didn't check it. Instead, she exhaled deep and slow, like something inside her had given way. Can I stay just until the rain stops? She asked. Ben nodded once, of course, no more questions. No assumptions, just warmth and safety, and the quiet kind of kindness that doesn't demand anything in return. Because sometimes that's all it takes: one charger, one chair, one moment of stillness, and a stranger with eyes like storms. The rain didn't let up. Outside, street lights blurred behind streaks of water on the caf windows. Inside, the world felt paused, warm, dim, and suspended in something tender. Ben moved slower now, rinsing the last mug with care. The woman, still sitting near the window with the charger plugged in, watched the sidewalk more than her phone. At some point, she had peeled off the wet trench coat, folding it neatly over the back of her chair. Underneath, she wore a soft gray sweater. It looked expensive, though she tried to make it disappear by how she curled into it. Ben brought her a fresh napkin and set it beside her gently. She looked up and met his eyes again. There was a vulnerability there, raw. Like a window crack, just enough to let air in and trust if you handled it carefully. You didn't ask, she said finally. He raised a brow. My name. Ben shrugged. Didn't figure it was mine to ask for. Her lips curled slightly. It's Rachel. A pause, not a lie maybe, but not the whole truth either. Still, it was something. He nodded. Nice to meet you, Rachel. I'm Ben. She repeated it softly under her breath, like trying it out. Ben. Silence followed again, a comfortable one. He started to move away, but something about the way her hands rested on the table caught his eye. Calluses. Small, precise ridges along the sides of her fingers. Not from lifting weights or hard labor, no. These were the kind you saw on people who used tools. Instruments. Something delicate and repetitive. Not the kind of hands you'd expect on a woman wearing a coat that cost more than his rent. Ben tucked the detail away. Didn't ask, didn't need to know. Rachel seemed to sense his observation. I used to work with my hands, she said quietly without being asked. Before everything got loud. Loud people. Expectations. Headlines. A strange choice of words. Headlines. Ben nodded slowly, pretending not to notice how her shoulders tensed after she said it. Still do sometimes, she added, brushing her thumb across the edge of the teacup. But not enough. He understood the feeling. How about you, she asked suddenly. Always wanted to run a caf. He gave a short laugh. Not quite. Used to be a teacher. Her eyes lifted. Really, yeah. Literature until Ivy was born. Then Emily got sick and he trailed off. Rachel didn't fill the silence. She waited, listened. That surprised him. The hours weren't sustainable anymore. He finished more softly. So I took night work, something flexible, something I could do while she slept. Rachel nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'd do it all again. Her gaze softened. She's lucky to have you. He offered a crooked smile. Most days she agrees. Another silence settled, but this time it felt like a shared blanket, thin but warm enough. Then Rachel reached for her phone. The screen blinked 39%. She didn't move, didn't unplug it, just stared at the numbers like they meant something more. Then barely above a whisper, Do you ever wish you could be invisible? Ben considered that. No, he said finally, but I know what it's like to be overlooked. She met his eyes again, something unspoken passing between them. And still he didn't ask anything more. Not why she was there. Not why she flinched at every car that passed. Not why her voice had that brittle edge, like it had held too many secrets for too long. She had given him a name, a presence, a flicker of truth. That was enough. For tonight. By 1:20 a.m. the rain had turned to a cold, punishing downpour. Rachel stood beneath the cafe's awning with her coat pulled tightly around her hood-up phone in hand. 3 rideshare apps open, none of them responding. Ben watched from the window as car after car passed, splashing through puddles, lights glowing in the wet street. She kept trying, refreshing, waiting. Nothing. He didn't want to offer. God, he didn't. Not in a city where good intentions could so easily backfire. Not with a little girl sleeping upstairs who trusted him to keep her world safe. But something about Rachel, the way her hands shook as she held the phone, the stubbornness in her jaw that tried to hide it, pulled at him. When she finally came back in, soaked and shaking again, she gave a weak smile. No luck, she said, setting her phone down. Ben hesitated, then quietly locked the cafe door behind her. I have a couch, he said, 3 blocks from here. It's not much, but you can dry off, rest. She looked at him, long and hard, not suspicious, just tired, so tired. Are you sure, she asked? No, he admitted honestly. But I wouldn't want Ivy out there in this, and I think someone's dad once let you in from the rain. Rachel's eyes flickered. Something unreadable passed behind them. She nodded. Okay. Ben's apartment was on the top floor of a narrow brownstone, 2 bedrooms, 1 too small kitchen, and a living room with a couch that sagged in the middle. Ivy's artwork lined the hallway, uneven stars. Purple elephants, 1 picture of Daddy making pancakes where Ben was taller than the house. They stepped inside quietly. Ben gestured to the couch, then toward the bathroom. Towels are under the sink. Blankets in that closet. I'll get you something dry to wear. Rachel gave a small nod, eyes scanning the modest space. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. It was warm, lived in, safe. She noticed the slippers by the stairs, tiny pink unicorn-shaped. Ivy's. Ben came back with a folded t-shirt and sweatpants. They'll drown you, he said, but they're clean. Thank you, she whispered, taking them. He turned away as she disappeared into the bathroom. A minute later, the shower turned on. Ben sat down at the kitchen table and dropped his head into his hands. What was he doing? He barely knew her. She hadn't told him the truth, not all of it. She was running from something, that much was clear. But she hadn't asked for anything more than shelter, and that part he understood. He remembered the nights he'd driven Emily to emergency rooms, wishing someone would just smile and not ask questions. He remembered how invisible you could feel even when surrounded by people. The water stopped. A few minutes passed. Then Rachel came out wrapped in his oversized shirt, damp hair pushed back from her face. Couch is yours, Ben said, standing. Ivy's asleep upstairs. You're safe here. He paused. If you need to leave in the morning, no questions asked. But if you want to talk, I'll listen. Rachel looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes didn't dart. They settled, held. Thank you, Ben. He gave a small nod, then disappeared up the stairs. Rachel sat down slowly on the couch. She ran her fingers across the worn blanket, then picked up a crayon drawing from the coffee table. Ivy had drawn a dragon with glitter wings and labeled it Miss Hope. She smiled, just a little, then finally allowed herself to rest. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't waiting to be chased. The smell of cinnamon toast drifted into the living room like a soft invitation. Rachel stirred, blinking against the early sunlight that cut through the dusty blinds. For a few long seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the crayon drawing still on the table, Miss Hope glitter wings and all. Ben's couch, the charger, the rain. In a girl's voice, high, curious, and suddenly very close. "Are you a fairy?" Rachel blinked again and found herself face to face with a little girl in purple pajamas, holding a stuffed owl like a bodyguard. What she said, voice still hoarse from sleep. The girl tilted her head seriously. "You look like one. Your hair is all gold and messy like in the stories." Rachel couldn't help it. She laughed. It startled even her. "No," she said, smiling gently. "I'm not a fairy." "Oh." Ivy looked a little disappointed, then brightened. "Do you like cartoons sometimes?" "Good. Daddy says we have to eat cereal and watch cartoons, or the day doesn't start right." "I see," Rachel said with mock solemnity. "Sounds like an important ritual." "It is," Ivy said. "Come on, you can have my favorite bowl. It has sparkles." Rachel sat up slowly, brushing her hair from her face. Her feet were cold against the hardwood, but her chest was warm, not from blankets, but from something softer. Belonging, even if borrowed. She followed Ivy into the kitchen, where Ben stood flipping slices of cinnamon toast on a pan. He turned when he heard them, surprised to see Rachel awake and smiling. "Morning," he said gently. Rachel nodded. "Morning. She's not a fairy," Ivy announced. "But she likes cartoons." Clearly qualified to join us, then Ben said, handing Ivy a plate. They sat together at the small table, Ivy in her booster seat, Rachel across from her, Ben at the head with a coffee mug he clearly needed. Ivy talked the whole time about her owl named Professor Hootington, about the missing purple crayon that turned up in her pajama pocket, about how Daddy sings like a frog in the shower, but I still clap. Rachel laughed, truly laughed, 3 times before the cereal was done. Ben watched her quietly from across the table. The way her face softened, the way she leaned into Ivy's stories without pretending. She wasn't just being kind, she was listening. Like maybe she hadn't had a moment like this in a very long time. Ivy leaned across the table, eyes big. "Can she come again tomorrow?" Ben raised a brow at Rachel, silently asking. Rachel hesitated. "I don't know," she said carefully. "I might need to go soon." Ivy pouted but nodded, accepting that with the grace only children sometimes could. "Then you need extra cartoons today," she decided. Rachel smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. "Okay," she whispered, "extra cartoons." That morning, for the first time in weeks, Rachel, not the runaway, not the missing CEO, just was. And it felt like breathing after holding her breath too long. Ben wiped down the kitchen counter, Ivy humming in the background, while cartoons played softly on the TV. Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor with Ivy helping her arrange puzzle pieces. There was a new lightness in her movements, as if for a few precious moments she'd forgotten to run. Ben glanced at the wall-mounted TV as he reached for the dish towel. He hadn't paid attention to the screen earlier, but a bright red banner caught his eye now. Breaking news: Dynacore CEO missing. He froze, the damp cloth in his hand forgotten. On screen, the anchor's voice was crisp and urgent. "This morning, sources confirmed that Eleanor, CEO of Dynacore Industries, failed to appear at a major board meeting scheduled overnight in Singapore time. Her security team last tracked her to a New York hotel lobby around 11:45 p.m. last night. Surveillance footage shows her leaving alone without staff or phone. She has not been seen since." Ben's eyes narrowed. The screen flashed to a photo studio-lit professional, a woman with steel gray eyes, golden hair, and a composed, polished expression. Eleanor Reese. He looked toward the living room. Rachel. Same eyes, same hair, though softer now, mussed from sleep. Same elegant cheekbones, even without the makeup. Same voice that had trembled just slightly when she said she'd needed to disappear. Ben's heart thudded. Dynacore shares have dipped nearly 5% in early trading. The company has issued no formal comment. Sources close to the family say Mrs. Reese had been under intense pressure following a series of high-stakes acquisitions. There are concerns for her safety. He turned off the volume and stepped back into the doorway. Rachel was still kneeling beside Ivy, laughing at something about a puzzle piece shaped like a fish. She hadn't noticed the broadcast. Or maybe she had, and was just pretending not to. Ben watched her for a moment, then cleared his throat gently. She looked up. Her eyes found the remote in his hand, then flicked toward the now muted screen. She didn't say anything, neither did he, but the shift in the air between them was sudden, like the silence before a storm. Rachel stood slowly. Her voice was calm, but her jaw was tight. "You saw." Ben nodded. "I did." Rachel crossed her arms, not defensive, but bracing. "I was gonna leave before you knew. I didn't want to drag you into this, I figured," he said softly. She looked at Ivy, still absorbed in her puzzle, then back at Ben. "I just needed one night. Just one." He nodded again. "You got it." Rachel blinked, surprised. "You're not calling anyone?" Ben stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. "No, not unless you want me to." Tears sprang to her eyes, sharp and sudden. She blinked them back with practiced speed. "Why?" she asked. "Why trust me?" Ben looked at Ivy, then at Rachel. "Because you trusted me first." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. But inside, the real storm was just beginning. And Rachel Reese, missing CEO daughter of the Dinosaur Empire, had one place left where she was still just a person. Ben didn't press her. Not right away. He helped Ivy clean up the puzzle, poured another round of juice, and gave Rachel no Eleanor space to breathe, to decide. But it was written across her face now, in the nervous flick of her eyes toward every window, in the way her hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. By the time Ivy was tucked in for her nap, the house was silent. Rachel stood by the window in the kitchen, arms folded tight. She hadn't touched the tea. Ben sat down beside her. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, pale, tired, exposed. Ben leaned against the opposite counter. "So," he said gently, "Eleanor Chase." She winced like the name stung. "That's not what I go by anymore," she said, voice low. He nodded. "Okay." "Rachel, then," she gave a shaky smile. "That's the first real thing I've chosen for myself in years." Ben didn't smile back. Not yet. He just looked at her quietly, carefully, trying to understand. "You're not just some CEO," he said. "You're the Eleanor Chase, founder of Nexery, partner in the Dinosaur merger. You vanished 3 weeks before the new product reveal. People think you were kidnapped." "I wasn't," she whispered. Then why? Rachel turned toward him, eyes tired, defenses stripped away. "Because I couldn't breathe anymore," she said. "Because every move I made was calculated, managed, controlled by lawyers, board members, legacy. I didn't even get to choose what city I woke up in. I needed one moment that was mine." Ben was silent. Rachel stepped forward, voice trembling. "You have no idea what it's like to be known by everyone but seen by no one. To be photographed, quoted, analyzed, and still feel invisible." He met her gaze. "I do, actually," he said. "Different reasons. But yeah, I know what it's like to feel unseen." That stopped her. He stepped closer. "Why my calf?" She shrugged weakly. "The rain, the quiet. You didn't look up at me like I was a headline. You looked like like someone with their own pain. And the charger?" Her voice softened. "You handed it to me like it didn't cost anything. Everyone else I meet, everything's a transaction." Ben exhaled slowly. And now Rachel sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking so small, so human. "Now I'm a ghost with $1 billion shadow," she whispered. "And I don't know where to go next." Ben sat across from her, quiet for a long moment. Then gently, "You don't have to figure that out today." She looked up, surprised. "I'm not offering answers," he added. "I'm offering toast, silence, cartoons if you want." A breath caught in her throat. Tears welled uninvited. "And if I bring all this chaos to your door," Ben half smiled, "then we'll answer it together." Outside, a breeze carried the scent of wet pavement and spring beginnings. And inside, Eleanor Chase, the ghost, the heiress, the CEO on the run, let herself believe that maybe for one more night, she could just be Rachel again. Ben didn't sleep. Not really. He sat at the edge of the couch long after Rachel had gone quiet in the guest room, eyes on the wall, heart wrestling with the truth he now knew. She wasn't just hiding from cameras. She was hiding from a world that had expected her to sign something big, and she hadn't. That wasn't the kind of decision someone made lightly or alone. By morning, the house felt different. He brewed coffee like always, made breakfast like always, but inside, something unsettled churned just beneath the surface. Rachel came down wearing one of Ivy's old hoodies, the sleeves too short, but the comfort undeniable. Her eyes met Ben's, and she knew. This morning wasn't like the last one. No puzzles, no cartoons, only truth. "I didn't lie to hurt you," she said softly. "I know," Ben replied, "but you left some things out." Rachel looked down at her hands. "I had to." Ben didn't press. He just pulled out the chair across from him at the table. Rachel sat slowly. Then finally she spoke. "I was supposed to sign over the last division of the company, the one focused on renewable tech. The board didn't want it anymore. Too slow to profit, too messy. They wanted to cut it, sell it, move on." Ben watched her unmoving. "I built that division," she continued. "It was mine. My mother's legacy too. Real impact, real change. And they wanted to turn it into a numbers game. And you said no," Ben guessed. Rachel nodded. "I refused to sign. I walked out of the gala, left my security, my team, my phone, everything." Ben leaned forward, his voice quiet but steady. "So the media thinks you're missing, and your board thinks you're the problem." "They always did," she whispered. "I was the inconvenient woman who didn't just smile for the cameras, who asked why before signing." "I got tired, Ben. So tired." He looked at her carefully. "You know they'll come looking, not just the press, the people who want that signature." "I know," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "And he'll face it. I will. But I couldn't face it there. Not in that room under those lights with a pen shaking in my hand and 20 vultures watching." "So you ran?" Rachel's eyes lifted to meet his. "Yes." And in that moment, she didn't look like a CEO. She looked like a woman on the edge, brave, broken, and tired of choosing between two impossible things. Ben took a long breath, then nodded. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Rachel blinked. "You're not angry. I'm not thrilled," he admitted. "But I've made my share of desperate decisions. So I get it, and Ivy likes you." Rachel smiled, tears threatening again. "She has good taste," she said. Ben stood, poured her a cup of coffee, set it gently in front of her. "Whatever you decide next," he said quietly, "you won't be deciding it alone." Rachel reached for the cup with trembling hands, not from fear this time, but from something far heavier. Relief. That morning, for the first time since running, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt held. And maybe that was enough to keep going. The rain had started again. It tapped softly against the windows like a clock ticking down the moments they had left. Eleanor sat at the edge of the worn couch, her hands tucked under her legs like a child afraid of breaking something delicate. Across from her, Ben paced slow, steady thinking, harder than he liked to show. Ivy was upstairs, asleep finally, curled into her owl-patterned blankets with a picture of Miss Rachel and her dad that she'd drawn before bedtime, stick figures and all. "She doesn't know," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben stopped pacing. "She doesn't have to." "I'll leave," she added, quickly swallowing. "Soon. I promise." He looked at her eyes, unreadable. "Not because I asked you to. No." She managed a soft, sad smile. "Because I have to. Because they'll come. And I can't let this," she nodded toward the stairs, "be collateral damage." Ben folded his arms. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. Eleanor paused. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I can't stay." Silence stretched between them, not cold, not angry, just real. Finally, Ben nodded. "Then here's the deal," he said, his voice low. "I won't tell anyone, not the press, not the cops, not the men who think they own you." Eleanor blinked. "Why?" He looked up at the ceiling toward Ivy's room. "For her," he said simply, "because she likes you, because you made her laugh when I couldn't, because I don't want her to learn too early that the world can be cruel to people just for needing a break." A tear rolled down Eleanor's cheek before she could stop it. Thank you, she whispered. Ben gave her a nod, not dramatic, not emotional, just solid. We'll give you space. Just tell me when you're ready to go, she stood slowly. I will. At the door, she paused and looked back. I meant what I said, she told him. You're the first person who didn't look at me like I was a headline. He held her gaze, something quiet and unspoken resting between them. I don't care about headlines, he said. Then you're one in a million, she replied. And then she disappeared into the hallway, the sound of her soft footsteps fading up the stairs. Ben stood alone, the rain tapping harder now. He exhaled. Not relief, not regret, just the weight of a promise, quiet, fragile, and real. Eleanor woke to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of a child's laughter. For a moment, she forgot who she was, forgot the headlines, the boardroom, the fear. She followed the sound to the kitchen, and there they were. Ivy in pajamas and a paper crown mixing orange juice with fierce concentration. Ben focused on pancakes that looked like torn maps. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, silent, smiling. For the first time in weeks, her body didn't ache with panic. Her chest didn't tighten at the thought of the future. She was simply here. Ivy looked up. You're awake. You want to sit next to me? Eleanor nodded. She sat. She laughed. She ate crooked pancakes and listened to a 7-year-old talk about squirrels and magic books. Later, she folded socks at the laundromat, picked apples at the market, sang along to the radio in Ben's beat-up car. No cameras, no masks, just wind in her hair and the sound of Ivy humming in the back seat. That night, after reading Ivy to sleep, Eleanor stood in the hallway with her hand pressed to her heart. Thank you, she whispered. Ben, drying dishes, looked over. For what? For letting me be a person again. He didn't answer with words, just gave a quiet, understanding nod. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Chase went to sleep feeling safe. The bell above the caf door chimed. Ben looked up and froze. 2 men in dark suits, cold eyes, quiet urgency. Benjamin Carter, one asked, showing a badge. We're looking for a missing person. Eleanor Chase. He slid a photo across the counter. Her, but not her. Not the woman who made pancakes with Ivy. Not the one who read bedtime stories like she needed them to. Ben stared at the glossy image, then shook his head slowly. Doesn't look familiar, he said. The men didn't buy it, but they left eventually. Ben stood still after the door closed, hands gripping the counter, breath shallow. He pulled out his phone. You okay? They came. I said nothing. A moment later, okay. Thank you. Truly. Ben stared at the message, then whispered mostly to himself. She trusted me. That has to mean something. And it did, more than either of them could say. The tea had gone cold. Eleanor sat on the couch, knees tucked to her chest, watching Ivy draw rainbows on scrap paper. The apartment was quiet, soft, lived in, safe. I forgot what this felt like, she said almost to herself. Ben looked up from the kitchen. What? She shook her head, smiling faintly. To be nobody, to have breakfast without headlines, to matter without a press release. Ben didn't say anything, he just listened. And somehow that made her feel more seen than 1,000 interviews ever had. I should go, she whispered. They'll come back. I'm a risk. I know, he said gently. But I want to stay, she added, voice cracking. Just a little longer. Ben stepped closer, eyes kind but steady. Then stay. Until you're ready. A beat. I don't know when that'll be, she confessed. That's okay, he said. Just don't disappear without saying goodbye. She looked at him, this stranger who'd never asked for her past, who only cared about the present. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Chase chose to stay. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. It was late. The lights were low and Ivy had long since fallen asleep. Rain tapped gently at the windows like it had every night Eleanor had stayed. She sat on the floor, knees pulled close, her voice quiet. You asked me once why I ran, she said. I lied. Ben looked at her from across the room, not interrupting. My brother died when I was 17, she began. He wasn't perfect, but he was free. And after the accident, my father looked at me like I had to make up for both of us. She swallowed. He put the entire company on my shoulders, called it legacy, said grief was weakness. So I smiled for the cameras. I got degrees, wore heels, shook hands. Her hands trembled. And I never once got to say goodbye to the person I missed the most. Ben sat beside her, now silent. My mom stopped talking after the funeral. She continued. She's still alive, just not there. So it was always me. Me and the weight. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't leave Dynacor just to avoid a deal. I left because I couldn't breathe in that building anymore. Ben said nothing. Instead, he reached over and gently took her hand, rough palm meeting delicate fingers. You don't have to carry it all here, he said quietly. She looked at him, and something inside her cracked wide open, not in pain and relief, because for the first time in years, she didn't have to pretend. The storm outside had passed, but inside the apartment, the warmth lingered. Eleanor sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through one of Ivy's storybooks, while the little girl carefully colored at the coffee table. Her tongue stuck out in concentration, eyebrows furrowed. I'm almost done, Ivy announced. Eleanor looked up. Done with what? My picture. Want to see? Ivy held it up proudly. Crayon lines danced across the page, a small house, a yellow sun, and 3 stick figures standing side by side. That's me, Ivy said, pointing to the girl with the braids. That's Daddy. And that, she paused, then grinned shyly. Miss Rachel. Eleanor blinked. There she was, her stick figure labeled in pink crayon, smiling wide with a flower in her hair. Like she belonged. Eleanor stared at the drawing, something in her chest twisted. Soft, achy, wonderful. I'm in your family, she asked, voice breaking, just a little. Ivy shrugged like it was obvious. You made pancakes, and you helped with my shoo-shoo, and Daddy smiles more when you're here. Ben stood in the doorway watching. He didn't say anything, didn't have to. His eyes said enough. Eleanor swallowed hard, clutching the paper like it might float away. In all her years of headlines and boardrooms, no one had ever drawn her into a family before. Until now, it was the 3rd night in a row. Ben stood at the window after midnight, the apartment dark, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. And there it was again, parked across the street. Not the same black SUV as before, but nearly identical. Too clean, too quiet, its engine off, its windows tinted. It hadn't moved in hours. He didn't wake Eleanor. She was asleep on the couch, one arm draped off the side the drawing Ivy made tucked beneath her pillow. But the worry that had been resting quietly in his chest all day began to rise sharp and alert. Ben stepped out into the fire escape. The rain had left the air heavy. He stared down at the SUV, still no movement. And then just for a second, the brake lights blinked. Once. Someone was watching. He stayed there a while until the clouds shifted and the SUV finally pulled away its tires, whispering over the wet pavement. Inside, Eleanor stirred. Her eyes fluttered open. Something wrong, she asked sleepily. Ben hesitated. No, he lied gently. Go back to sleep. But deep down, he knew the time they borrowed was almost up. The rain hadn't let up all morning. Outside, reporters hovered on the sidewalk, their cameras pointed toward the apartment. They didn't know for sure if she was inside, but they suspected. Inside, Eleanor stood in Ben's small living room, barefoot, wrapped in Ivy's soft dinosaur blanket. She stared at her phone. Her fingers hovered over the call button. You don't have to do this here, Ben said gently. I do, she whispered. This is where I found my voice again. She pressed the button. When her lawyer picked up, Eleanor's tone was calm, steady, the voice of a woman not being chased but choosing her path. This is Eleanor Chase, she said. I want you to draft my resignation from the board, effective immediately. A pause, then, yes, I understand what that means. Her hand trembled only slightly when she ended the call. Ben watched her silent. She turned to him, eyes glistening. I walked away once in fear, she said. This time I'm walking away free. Outside, the press still waited, but Eleanor, she just curled up beside Ivy and waited for the rain to stop. It happened in a blink. Eleanor stepped out of Ben's calf with a warm croissant in one hand and Ivy's tiny fingers wrapped in the other. No makeup, no entourage, just soft laughter and windblown hair. Ben held the door open behind them, smiling like a man who just found something he didn't know he was missing. Across the street, someone raised a phone. Click. The photo was blurry, unposed reel. By sunset, it had circled the internet. Is this Eleanor Chase? Is that the missing CEO with a child? She looks happy. News outlets dissected it. Social media exploded. Comment sections filled with speculation and shock, but also something unexpected. Kindness. Let her breathe. That's the first time she's ever looked human. Maybe this is the life she chose. Back in the apartment, Eleanor sat on the floor beside Ivy, scrolling in silence. Ben watched her from the kitchen, tension knotting his stomach. She looked up, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. They know. He walked over, sat beside her. So what now? Eleanor stared at the screen, then turned it off. Now, she said softly, I stopped running. And she put the phone down and picked Ivy up. The street was no longer quiet. By morning, 5 media vans lined the curb. Reporters with umbrellas shouted questions at passing neighbors. Camera lenses glinted through the calf windows. Inside, Ivy clutched her stuffed dinosaur. Why are there trucks outside, Daddy? She asked, her voice small. Ben crouched beside her. They're just noisy people. Don't worry, okay? Eleanor stood behind him, pale silent. The phone rang Ben's manager. It was short and final. We can't have press at the shop, they said. You're a distraction now. Ben stared at the wall after the call ended. Not angry, just hollow. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered. He shook his head slowly. This isn't your fault. But it is, she said. You helped me, and now you're paying for it. Ivy tugged on Eleanor's sleeve. Are you still gonna stay? Eleanor knelt, looking her in the eyes. If you want me to. Ivy nodded. Ben watched them, his daughter, and the woman who'd once borrowed a charger and now carried their lives in her hands. Everything was unraveling outside, but inside this tiny home, something fragile and real was holding on. The conference room inside the Delacroix Media Tower was packed, journalists, shoulder-to-shoulder cameras, blinking red microphones clustered like hungry mouths. The last time Eleanor Chase had stood here, she was polished and distant. This time she wore no jewelry. Her hair was tied back, and her voice was steady but human. She stepped to the podium. I know what the headlines have said, she began. That I disappeared. That I abandoned my post. That I ran, a pause. You're right, I did run, but not from responsibility, from losing myself. The room held its breath. For years, I was taught that leadership meant perfection. That emotion was weakness. That my worth was tied to profit margins and public image. She exhaled slowly. But in the middle of that storm, I met someone who had nothing to gain from me. No agenda, no questions. She looked directly into the cameras. A man who gave a stranger his phone charger in a calf because she looked like she needed kindness. A man who let me sleep on his couch. Who let me cry in silence. Who protected my story when the world wanted to consume it. She paused, her voice breaking. His name is Ben Carter. He's a single dad, and he reminded me I was a person before I was a CEO. The room went still. Not a camera clicked. Not a whisper stirred. Whatever future I choose from here, she said softly, I will build it with people like him in mind, people who lead with heart. She stepped back. And for once, it wasn't about scandal, stock prices, or spin. It was about a woman who had everything and found what really mattered in a moment of human grace. Ben Carter's phone wouldn't stop ringing. In just 24 hours, his life had flipped. Offers poured in, morning show, interviews, podcast features. Even a book deal, one luxury brand, offered him a lifetime coffee supply if he'd pose with their mug. There were threats, too. Some online voices called him an opportunist, a liar, a manipulator who'd trapped a fragile heiress. None of it was true, but the noise didn't care. Ben shut his phone off. He watched Ivy build a blanket fort in the living room and wondered how to explain all of this to a 6-year-old who still thought magic was real. The door knocked gently. It was Eleanor. No makeup, no press, just her holding a paper bag of pastries, a soft smile tugging at her mouth. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said. Ben let her in. They sat on the floor, shared breakfast with their knees touching. Ivy climbed into Eleanor's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. He looked at her, this woman who'd come crashing into his life at random. Or maybe not so random. "I don't want fame," Ben said suddenly. "I know. I just want peace." She reached for his hand, held it. "I think we both do." Outside, the world kept spinning. But in this little corner of it, a borrowed charger, a shared meal, a second chance, something steady had begun. Not lightning, not fireworks, just warmth, just enough. The lights in the elementary school auditorium dimmed, and the hush that followed was filled with whispers and crinkling candy wrappers. Ben sat in the third row holding his breath. Tonight was Ivy's first school play. She was playing a tree, a very enthusiastic tree. He checked the seat beside him. Still empty. It had been months. Eleanor had vanished, not with headlines, but with a quiet message: "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not being watched. Thank you for letting me be nobody." He hadn't heard from her since, until now. A soft rustle. Someone slid into the seat beside him. Ben turned. A hoodie, worn sneakers, her hair tucked beneath a cap. But those eyes, she offered him a sheepish smile. "I didn't want to distract anyone." He stared at her, stunned, relieved, moved. "You came. Wouldn't miss it," she whispered. "She's my favorite tree." On stage, Ivy spotted them and beamed. She waved right in the middle of her line, and the tiny cardboard leaf on her head bobbed with joy. Eleanor laughed under her breath. Ben leaned closer. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I am now." And in that small, crowded auditorium filled with glitter and glue and the squeaky voices of first graders, a new chapter began. Quiet, unannounced, but absolutely right. The stars were bright that night, scattered across the sky like someone had gently shaken a box of light. Ben and Eleanor sat side by side on the rooftop of his apartment building, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders, the city humming far below. Ivy had fallen asleep hours ago, curled between them earlier while they watched the moon rise. Now it was quiet, not the kind of silence that begged to be filled, but the kind that spoke all on its own. Eleanor rested her head against Ben's shoulder just slightly. He didn't move. Didn't need to. They'd been through case, headlines, loss, laughter, a war of trust and a flood of truth. Now there was peace, a soft understanding neither needed to name. "Do you ever miss it?" Ben asked quietly. "The power," she replied. "Sometimes, but not the person I had to become to keep it." He nodded. She looked up at the stars. "I used to think love had to be loud," she whispered. "Grand gestures, shiny things, control." And now she smiled faintly. "I think maybe it feels more like this." Ben didn't speak. He just gently shifted his hand, brushing his pinky against hers, a soft touch like a question. Eleanor didn't pull away. She just let their hands rest, connected by something delicate and deep. No promises, no declarations, just presence. And in that silence, under a sky filled with stars, neither of them owned the truth settled gently between them. They didn't have to say the words. They were already there. The café was quiet just before closing. Ben was wiping down tables, his sleeves rolled, his mind somewhere between fatigue and contentment. Ivy sat at the counter, drawing dragons on a napkin. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the rain tap softly against the glass. She turned, holding something in her hand, a slim envelope with her name embossed on it. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Another gala," Eleanor gave a half smile. "Something like that." She walked over and laid the envelope on the counter. Been rebuilding something. Quietly. A foundation. For people who fall through the cracks. Like I almost did, Ben looked at her, and I need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who doesn't flinch when people are messy or tired or lost. Her voice softened. Someone who knows what it's like to fight for a second chance. He opened the envelope. Inside was a job offer. A real one. No charity. No strings. Just trust. Ben stared at it for a long moment. You sure, he asked. You want a janitor on your board? I want you, she said, steady and clear. You saw me when I didn't even see myself. That's leadership. Ivy looked up from her napkin. Does it come with snacks? They laughed. Ben looked back down at the offer, then back at Eleanor. Her eyes didn't waver. You're not saving me, he said. I wouldn't dare. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Okay, he said. Let's build something better. And for the first time in a long, long while, they both felt like they were standing at the beginning. Not of survival, but of purpose. Ben stared down at the offer in his hands. It was generous, thoughtful. Exactly the kind of opportunity people dreamed about, one that came with purpose, meaning a seat at a table he never imagined he'd be near. He looked up at Eleanor. She stood there, waiting, not pressuring, not pleading, just open. Ben exhaled slowly and set the offer down on the counter between them. I'm honored, he said gently, but I don't think that's where I belong. Her eyes flickered surprise, maybe even disappointment, but she nodded. I don't want a title, he continued. I want time. With Ivy. With you, if you will let me. I've spent so long chasing what I lost, I don't want to lose what I have now, trying to catch something new. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, then her eyes softened. So what do you want? Ben smiled, a little crocked, a little tired, but full of warmth. I want you to come to dinner. She blinked. Dinner? He nodded toward the kitchen. Spaghetti night. It's kind of a thing around here. Eleanor laughed, that rare, real laugh that reached all the way to her eyes. Will there be garlic bread? She asked. Ben leaned in. There will be extra garlic bread. She smiled, and it wasn't the poised CEO smile or the mask she wore for the world. It was something quieter, braver, something true. Then I'd love to. Ivy peeked around the corner with flour on her cheeks. Is she staying for dinner? Ben looked at Eleanor, then back at his daughter. She's staying, he said. And in that small kitchen, with the scent of tomato sauce in the air and laughter beginning to bloom, there were no billion-dollar companies, no headlines, no fear, just three people choosing each other. On purpose. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, 1 window that stuck when it rained, floors that creaked like they had stories to tell. The kitchen was barely big enough for a kettle and a coffee mug, but it was hers. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her new apartment, barefoot, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. For the first time in her life, she'd signed a lease without an assistant, without a lawyer, without a shadow. No doorman, no penthouse elevator, no marble. Just chipped tiles, sunlight through dusty curtains, and silence that wasn't loneliness, but space. A beginning. She unpacked slowly. 1 bag, a photo of her mother, a notebook with no name on the cover, a single coat hanging by the door. Everything she owned now fit in 1 room, and somehow it felt right. Across the hall, she heard footsteps, then a knock. When she opened the door, Ivy stood there holding a potted plant with a pink bow stuck sideways on the rim. Ben stood behind her, smiling. Housewarming, he said. Ivy handed her the pot. It's fake. So you don't kill it. Eleanor laughed, not just from the joke, but from the way it felt to be seen without being handled. She stepped aside. Come in. They ate pizza on the floor. No plates. Too much laughter. Crumbs everywhere. And later, when Ben helped tuck Ivy into a borrowed sleeping bag and Eleanor leaned against the wall, watching the scene like it was something rare and delicate, she realized she hadn't lost a life. She had finally started living one. Not as Eleanor chased the CEO, just Eleanor. A woman with her feet on creaky floors, a second-hand bookshelf, and a chance to build something real. From zero. Eleanor burned the toast again. She stared at the blackened slice like it had betrayed her. The smoke detector chirped in disapproval. She waved a dish towel at it, coughing and laughing at the same time. "Third time this week," she muttered. In the past, breakfast had been prepared by chefs in pressed whites. Meals arrived covered in silver domes, never late, never overcooked. Now her kitchen smelled like ash and adventure. She liked it that way. She forgot to buy dish soap, bought 3 bottles of shampoo instead of conditioner, got lost in the produce aisle and panicked when asked paper or plastic. She loved every second of it. There was something beautiful about not knowing, about asking the woman behind her in line how to pick a ripe avocado, about standing in her tiny living room with music playing too loud, dancing like no one was filming for a board meeting. She called Ben one afternoon in tears because she had no idea how to fill out a school field trip form. He came over with coffee and a pen. "It's okay not to know," he said. "It means you're learning." She blinked at him. "Is it weird that I'm happy?" "No," he said. "It's real." That night, Ivy taught her how to make boxed mac and cheese. And Eleanor, once the most powerful woman in a high-rise tower, proudly stirred neon orange powder into overcooked noodles and declared it perfect. And it was. Because normal, messy, silly, imperfect normal was something she'd never known she craved. Now she was learning it. One burnt toast at a time. The afternoon sun poured into the small apartment like honey golden and slow. Ivy sat cross-legged on the rug, coloring in the corner of a cardboard castle Eleanor had helped her build. Ben sat on the couch, sipping coffee. Eleanor sat beside him, absently helping Ivy sort crayons by color. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels full, not empty. Ivy held up a drawing, a family of 3 stick figures, one with curls, one with stubble, and one with pigtails in a purple dress. "This one's me," she said proudly. "And that's Daddy, and that's Miss Rachel." Eleanor smiled softly. "I like my dress." Ivy nodded, then hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Then in the gentlest voice she asked, "Is Miss Rachel going to be my real mommy?" The world stilled. Ben inhaled quietly. He looked at Eleanor. Eleanor blinked, not startled, not scared, just deeply moved. She placed her hand gently on the floor beside Ivy's, not touching, just near. Ben set his mug down. "Sweetheart," he said slowly, "you already had a real mommy, and she loved you so much." Ivy nodded. "I remember. A little." Then she turned to Eleanor. "But I think you love me too. You always tie my shoes the special way." Eleanor's throat tightened. She leaned closer. "I do love you, Ivy. Very, very much." Ivy studied her face for a second, that curious, trusting look children have, then smiled. "Okay, that's enough." And just like that, she returned to coloring. Ben looked at Eleanor. There was no pressure in his eyes, just gratitude, respect, a kind of quiet awe. Eleanor didn't say a word, but her hand reached over and found his, and held on. Not as a promise, not yet, but as a maybe, a hope, a beginning. The coffee shop was nearly empty, just the quiet hum of an old ceiling fan and the occasional hiss of espresso behind the counter. Rain tapped gently against the windows, drawing soft streaks down the glass. Ben sat across from Eleanor, his hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug. They'd come here before once when she was still hiding, still unsure. But this time she wasn't hiding. She wore no disguise, no mask, just a soft cardigan, jeans, and a tired kind of bravery in her eyes. Ben looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to memorize her. Not her face, but the way she made the room feel lighter. She met his gaze and said quietly, "You've given me every chance to leave. To choose the old life, I know," he said. Eleanor's voice was steady. "I still might not get everything right." Ben gave a soft smile. "I'm not asking for perfect. She swallowed hard. Then what are you asking for? And that's when he said it, gently, simply, I want this. I want you. There was no dramatic swell of music, no grand gesture, just the truth sitting between them like a third cup of coffee. Eleanor blinked not because she didn't believe it, but because it had been so long since someone had chosen her without agenda. Ben leaned forward slightly. Not the version of you that ran, not the one the media built up. Just you, the woman who laughs at my bad jokes and tucks Ivy in like it's sacred. Eleanor nodded and a tear slid down her cheek. Then she whispered back the only words that mattered. I want this too. He reached across the table and took her hand. And in that small cafe on a rainy afternoon, two people who had spent too long surviving finally gave each other their first quiet yes. Not the end, just the beginning of something real. It was raining again. Not the kind of storm that sent people running, just the kind that slowed the world down, a soft, steady hush that made everything feel closer, more alive. The little bell above the cafe door jingled and Ivy burst in, laughing, her raincoat 3 sizes too big and her boots splashing water onto the floor. Her curls had grown longer, wild and happy. Ben looked up from the counter and grinned. You forget your umbrella again. Ivy shrugged, cheeks flushed. Didn't want to miss the puddles. Behind her, Eleanor followed, a folded newspaper over her head, strands of damp hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked less like the woman who once disappeared from headlines and more like someone who had finally arrived home. Ben handed her a towel. You're late. Eleanor leaned across the counter and kissed his cheek. Blame the artist. Ivy proudly unzipped her backpack and pulled out a drawing, this time not on a napkin or a scrap, but on thick, bright paper. 3 people, holding hands, a house, a tree, a little coffee cup with a heart in it. She held it up. It's called Our Family. Ben took the drawing, hands soft as if holding treasure. He looked at Eleanor, then at Ivy. We should frame this. Ivy pointed to the corner of the page. I drew the charger too. They all turned to look. There it was, still plugged in, still hanging by the window. The same charger that had started it all one rainy night. Frayed a little now, but never replaced. A reminder of what happens when you give a stranger 5 minutes of kindness, of how sometimes the smallest choices echo the loudest. Eleanor touched the charger gently. Funny, isn't it? What Ben asked, that this little thing connected my whole life back together. Outside, the rain kept falling. Soft, steady, but inside the cafe, there was warmth, laughter, love without conditions. A family stitched not by blood, but by choice. Ivy pulled up a stool. Eleanor poured coffee. Ben added an extra cookie beside Ivy's cocoa. And in that moment, as the charger hung quietly in the background, they didn't need any more headlines, any more answers. They had everything they needed right here.